Hi, Lela here today with another video for you on how to trim pots. Trimming is a step where we remove most of the excess clay from the bottom of a pot. It needs to be at the leather hard stage, and you're going to be able to create a foot here. Trimming isn't necessary, but it does create a nice visual balance to your pots and is something I do with most of my work. The first step is to get your pot recentered on the wheel. I'm tap centering here, which means to tap lightly on the spot that is farthest from center and slowly knock the piece into center. You'll know when you've succeeded when the piece has little to no wobble at the spot you want to trim. Then you will attach the pot to the wheel with little lugs of clay, making sure to press firmly onto the top of the pot to prevent the pressure from knocking it off of center. Once the lugs of clay are in place, you can speed up your wheel and take your trimming tool. I'm using an angled, bent piece of metal, sharpened along the edges. Nick makes all of my tools for me. He's the other half of Now What Pottery Works. I prefer these tools because they're easier to sharpen than the loop tools that are very popular. Taking your trimming tool, you'll support it so that it can't bounce and carefully bring the tool into contact with the clay at an angle. If your clay is at the right consistency and your tool at the right angle, the clay will form lovely ribbons as you trim. Part of the goal of trimming is to create an even thickness throughout your piece. In doing so, you can create any number of interesting variations for your feet and for your pots. If you don't trim enough, your piece may crack from drying at different rates, which is also another important reason to trim. Any spot in your clay that is thicker may crack as it dries because moisture leaves the piece at different rates, which can cause stress. Creating stress in your piece can cause things to crack, and that's definitely not what you want. I had to stop briefly here because my piece wasn't attached well enough, and that can cause you to trim things unevenly, which can lead to kind of a wonky appearance. So I had to stop to reattach that. Really, trimming is something you kind of just have to try to get a good feel for. I can explain it as much as I want, but until you try it, you're not really going to understand what I mean. Same thing kind of goes for throwing, but I'm kind of able to talk you through that a little bit better. Trimming is really just getting rid of excess material on the outside of your pot, and when you do it, there's like a particular angle that works best for your tool in combination with your clay, so it's a little individual for everyone. Really, the most important part is making sure you're removing enough material, but not removing too much that you trim through the bottom of your piece. And that's just something that kind of takes experience. You will ruin pieces when you're first learning to trim. I find that it's important to start with the side of your pot, not the center for your foot. This way you can establish better proportions if you're focused on the ratio from foot to lip, and then you can trim the center out of your foot. I'm also being very careful while I'm trimming to support my pot while I'm pressing on it because I'm using a good bit of force here with my trimming tool, and this way I'm not knocking my pot off center because I'm centering with one hand while I'm trimming with the other. This is a little tricky to do because sometimes you knock your pot off center and off the wheel, but once you get the hang of it, it's very handy because you're able to be a little rougher while you trim without causing trouble. Now that I've finished trimming the sides of my pot, I'm going to go in and trim the well out for the foot. This is the point where it's most easy to make a mistake. You can trim through the base of your pot and create a hole where there's not supposed to be one. It's really important to know how thick or thin your piece is here, which is why in the first tutorial I did, I suggested you cut your pieces in half to see how thick or thin they are to start. One of my favorite tricks when I'm trimming to tell how thick or thin something is to tap lightly with my finger on the base versus the side, and the difference in noise can let you know how much you have to trim because the sound will be different. It's something you kind of have to do with experience. Maybe I will try to catch that in a video for you to hear next time. I'm also a fan of having lots of different shapes of trimming tools to use while you're trimming. I find that each different shape allows for a different finish, allows me to remove a different amount of material, and allows for just kind of a different feel. So you see me switching off tools a couple of times in this video. I'm going to make a video in the future on all of my favorite tools. I'm kind of spoiled because my husband makes mine from scratch for me, which is super cool, and hopefully I will convince him to make a video on how to make your own trimming tools. Trimming is also one of the most satisfying parts of this process to watch. Hopefully you're enjoying watching all these little ribbons fly off of the cup I'm trimming. I do spend quite a lot of time addressing different little angles and things on the foot. I'm very picky about that because I feel like it gives the clay a nice balance when you set it down and feels good in the hands, so I trim quite a lot on my pieces. It's also just kind of addicting. It's one of the most satisfying parts of making for me. It's the most visually interesting, at least in my opinion. It's very satisfying to take something that you've thrown that's a very rough shape and finish it off to the point where it's something you can see yourself using. It's also very important for me that I end up with a very smooth surface because I decorate my pieces. So once I've finished, getting the majority of the clay off, I like to do a couple of passes that smooth any ridges that I've formed and kind of clean up any bumps or lumps. Sometimes if you trim too quickly, you kind of get little like ridges from the tool moving, and I have a tool that I really like to smooth that all out. That way, when I go to decorate, I don't have to work on a bumpy surface. Once I'm finished trimming, I also like to take a damp finger and run it along the outer edge of the foot to keep it from being too sharp. If you create kind of a sharp angle when you trim, it's more likely that you're going to chip that foot, setting it down in daily use. So I like to make sure everything is just rounded enough that it's not going to chip. And a damp finger does that nicely. Sometimes I'll also use a sponge if I need it to be a little bit more aggressive. Now that I'm finished doing things with the wheel spinning, I'm going to stop the wheel and carefully remove the lugs of clay so that I can take the pot off of the wheel. I can then take the piece off of the wheel and it's ready for the next stage. I also make sure that there are no little bits of clay from those lugs left over on the surface of the pot. You see me wiping a little bit of that off in this video. And then I clean the surface of my wheel head up with a rib, and then you can reuse those lugs of clay until they dry out too much to use again. If you have any suggestions for videos or tips or tricks you'd like to see, leave them in the comments below. That's it for this week's tutorial on trimming. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe for some more videos, and I will see you next week.